All right, today on the podcast, we're going to talk about oxygenation and magnesium. So, magnesium is whenever you have like a tooth, let's picture a tooth, you take the main component is calcium, but calcium would make the tooth brittle if it didn't have other things involved in the structure. And so, one of the main components is magnesium, insofar as the ability of magnesium to create a flexibilization of the material. So what it does is magnesium is kind of like the it's a softer stone, I guess you could say, or a softer metal, or so it's a softer stone, softer piece than the calcium, and so that allows for, but it doesn't soften the calcium. It just a certain amount of that softening throughout the structure allows that structure to not only be flexible and not break and not be brittle, but also be strong. The flexibility and the strength put together, that that's how you create. It's almost like rigidity and flexibility put together, which doesn't make sense because it's like two opposites. But whenever there's that right combination there, you have, it's like almost like having a square, and then you kind of round the corners and you put a little mag on those corners, and then those corners can move a little bit. And so you have a certain amount of rigidity and nice accents of the flexibility. So it kind of works that way at the structural level. Magnesium, we know that it helps fix calcium. That's well known, but that's how it's operating. It's helping to fix it by, allowing it to soften in a certain area or on a certain perimeter so that it can connect with other things. Otherwise, it would be too hard, for example, to build. It's almost like mortar or something. It's like you have the bricks and you have the mortar. But anyway, so you need this kind of. I mean, it's like it might be overly simplistic, but you still see these. Magnesium, calcium are not. They are the two that we should be talking about. I mean, you could talk about tons of different minerals and things that make up a tooth, but we're going with the most important kind of key elements. And so whatever makes flexible in the body, not only from bone, but also nerves, tissue, everywhere, even down to the level of like platelets and hemoglobin. Magnesium is known as well to be precursor. Well, no, I guess you could say catalytic in the creation of the surface. I mean, we know magnesium plays into all the structure of the human body, not just in an active way as like a deficiency, as some sort of viscosity that comes through, that water-bearing element that comes through and allows for a certain type of viscosity, which maybe coats the nerves, coats certain parts of structure, allows for a kind of a buffering. That's one element. That's the active element. But then you have the not passive, but then you have the structural element, which is like already set up. So a previous deficiency would have created bad structure, and then that bad structure would be lacking in certain things. And then you could add to that an active deficiency. So there's two types of deficiency, like the deficiency in the structure, which can take up to 7 years to re-heal all the different structures that magnesium is involved with in the human body in an optimal system. And then you also have the active deficiency. So the structural level is kind of what we're talking about here, because it's this is going to focus on oxygenation and hypoxia and what the French discovered. So the French did a study in 1930s on the soil deficiency in magnesium and the cancer cases in 1930 of France, and they corresponded near exactly. It was like a crazy image that you saw, and they probably got in a lot of trouble for putting this out there. But I mean, the basic premise is that, cancer is caused by magnesium deficiency. And so that type of statement is pretty powerful, and it has a lot of reality to it at the structural level. It doesn't mean that, cancer and every other kind of disease may not have a three, Hippocrates said, search the cause of the cause of the cause. So that means what? That means three. There's like body, soul, spirit. There's three things there. And so sometimes these diseases and states can be trifactorial or multifactorial. And so finding that is but you have to start where the first stone, I guess, you have to start with. And so that would be the physical. I'm not saying you have to heal from the physical down. You can heal from the spiritual down through the soul and to the physical. But this is a good place for our understanding to focus on because it's more readily available. And it takes a type of spirit or wisdom or whatever you want to call it to pierce into material and see how the material, the spiritualization of the material, and how I wouldn't say that magnesium is a spiritualization of the material, but what I mean is that paying close attention to the material will reveal itself to you in kind of a spirit enhanced way. Spirit being used as a word for, like science, philosophy, a lot of these, I guess you could say, uh, divinely inspired impulses that we ran with, and it has become part of human thinking, but they came out of an origin, and so there is mysteries in the brain and in anatomy and a lot of this, but it takes a very open mind to be able to see what is more subtle and nuanced and follow that than to just be a reductionist kind of materialism Cartesian way of thinking, like it's all about its pieces. Well, okay, you figured the piece part out, but what about the whole and how that all reconnects? So magnesium is a great place to look at some of these pieces and the whole because it's so ubiquitous in the body, how it works and its overall effect, and then even just the micro effects. So back on subject, this is about cancer and this is also about hypoxia. So a lot of people walk around like, I don't have magnesium deficiency, I don't have cramps and pain, I sleep great. So they may have some of these things, but what you have to realize is this is a 200 to 300 year deficiency. I mean, it started heavily with refined foods and Napoleon and the wars of France and the refinement and the soil monoculturing that we started doing. There was a lot of the reasons that we got out of proper magnesium in our food. But we'd already left behind the bath culture, which Greece used to overcome their deficiency. So a lot of people don't know that. They always think of Greece as like, oh, they were just bathing and they had a lot of fun and hygiene and stuff. These were people who knew about the magnesium deficiency, at least at an intuitive level. And so they copied thermae, which is loutraki, which is a Greek bath that was naturally heated. And they copied that same exact system because they got such good benefits out of that system. The old and young alike, there was this kind of healing waters, And so they said, hey, let's copy this into our whole culture. And they did. They made the same limestone, the dolomitic limestone, and they would heat it, and they created all these bath structure. But they were basically creating high mag water, like up to a point, because these stones are quite porous, and even the mortar that they made would be, porous with heat and releasing some of this into the water, which already had high magnesium content because of the region. The region where they started that culture was Magnesia. But to get back on subject about cancer and hypoxia, a lot of people can't see that we've already left behind our sources for magnesium, not only through the skin, but now through food. So we're getting this kind of growing deficiency, which cannot be overcome. And so that's creating, everything from cavities on down to everything else in the body. From bone, spur formation, arthritis, calcium deposition on top of the cell instead of going in, because magnesium helps to, keep the cell from dying through calcium penetration, the calcium blocking effect that magnesium has. I mean, the cell spends 30% of its energy trying to block out calcium, and so that's what the magnesium comes in there and softens that and allows that calcium to be used properly. It also does that with sugar too, curiously. The magnesium helps sugar to be used properly in the brain. That's why it helps with concentration. But so when you have this structure, everybody's in denial of it. So that's what happens. People walk around, they feel fine, they're great, all's good, and they're in total denial. They're in total denial that no one walking around on this earth today doesn't have magnesium deficiency at the structural level. I mean, unless they're from some, strange combination of magnesium-rich soil, this, that, possibility. But in general, in the civilized world, everyone is magnesium deficient. And the reason we know that is because you can't test the deficiency in the blood. Magnesium isn't stored in the blood. You might find some pathological level of magnesium deficiency by seeing no reflection in the blood. But that doesn't mean that blood shows you optimum or anything close to that. It shows you where the optimum levels are, or that it shows you where it's actually stored, which is in the soft tissue, 45% of the magnesium. is in the soft tissue, and it's a patchwork deficiency. So you have to feed the skin. You have to go through the ectoderm, through the nerves, not through the mesoderm, to redeliver to, you come through the nerves itself. That's why it's so good for pain. But so that hypoxia is underneath. People aren't conscious of it, but they're living it. So we're seeing it now with coronavirus and with all these other things that are coming along, autism, and there's so many things coming that have a hypoxic etiology where the hypoxia starts the process. And so of, down, the downward spiral. And so this lack of structural oxygenation is happening because the structures themselves, from bone to nerve to tendon to muscles, that all use magnesium as in their substrate, they all have less flexibility and therefore less breathability. They breathe less well without that element. So when mag goes down in the culture over the generations, calcium doesn't necessarily change. So what happens is, calcium could change, but there's going to be, the calcium will remain. The magnesium will always be the first limited factor in the formula. So don't worry about, how much calcium I get. You got to get the mag. The mag is the limiting factor in our society and all the studies that we know about. This is the one that's the limiting factor. So to knock that out first. But so when the calcium mag goes down, calcium stays, and that creates more rigidity. So those little rounded corners aren't there anymore. And now there's less oxygenation to that cell, whether it be a tooth cell or anything else. So we have magnesium transporters for every cell in the human body. They're about the size of 1% of the skin. So people say, a 1% hole in the middle of a square means that they're not getting magnesium through there. That's too small of a percentage. And it's like, what? The bathtub has a 1% hole in it, and it works very well to drain that thing and bring things, So there's a lot of, where reductionist science sees a processes of death, like the skin, it's dead, the stratum corneum is dead. The new world, the awakening world, not the new world, but the awakening world, who's more sensitive and intuitive, is seeing that there's a life process underneath that just hasn't been, understood yet. And so that's what's happening with the fall of science, like the fall from grace of the mind to a certain degree, where we've moved away from, the intuition and experiential wisdom, and we've gone into, just like reductionism and trying to break things down based on a priori, which is really hard to get out of the system, I mean, if you see the whole universe as nothing but planets and these processes, mineral processes, then you basically see the skeleton of the universe. That's how you're seeing the whole universe, as a dead skeleton. So in that dead vision, there is no life. So do you see the soul of the universe? Do you see any of those features? No, not that kind of person. They're not seeing that. But the body, soul, and spirit nonetheless exist, and probably exist more really, like to define the word real, than what we see right in front of us. So it's just like a frequency. You see certain things, but there's a whole bunch else going on. So anyway, you have to be a little bit more open to, and fun. The funny thing about, having this faith-based thinking, which isn't religious per se, it's just, taking risk in your thinking, takes a certain amount of humility, where you just allow yourself to be open to the fact that maybe you don't know everything. And then the mystery kind of reveals itself, instead of like, I got this, I know. So magnesium is a perfect place to start with this. And so going back to the structure, the hypoxia is there. We're all walking around with it. Reverse it. Transdermal magnesium, do it for a year. It'll store it up for 7 years. Those 7 years, it'll start replacing everything in the human body. And you'll have a much more flexible structure after 7 years. And so you reverse that tendency. This is what the transdermal is offering us. It's not just some random side pocket product. It's right in the center of the most essential deficiency on the planet. And so we have to pay attention and see how to do this right, with glass bottles, with one ingredient, with only Zechstein inside brand, like getting it from the source, not these fake American brands that just say the word Zechstein abusively. They have genuine and ancient and all this stuff. Get rid of that stuff. Find it from Europe. That's where the source is. And so you can find American brands. I'm just saying you have to find it in glass and with the logo. But either way, or you can come check us out at theheartoftradition.com. But either way, you have to start with this deficiency in order to work down your way to health. So you have to knock that. Like if you have a sleep problem, you have to start with magnesium deficiency. So, and a lot of other problems are that way too. So you start there and then you work your way down. You can't troubleshoot with all these deficiencies that being active. So anyway, if that could be some help to someone, this hypoxic state that we're all in, that we're all walking around in, that's in our chest, that's in our, what do you say, bronchial, tubes. I forget the words. I'm like I'm a naturopath. I learned a lot of this in French. And so I have to convert there's some anatomical words that I'm like, how do you say that? And so yeah, come check us out there, and realize that we have this in us. We are carrying this deficiency at the structural level. So you can hold your constitution up as much as you want, but they got us at the structural level in this whole freedom versus slavery thing. So we have to break free from there too. So anyway, get free. Come check us out, theheartoftradition.com.